But I want to start by asking Mr. Carr a question. I asked Mr. Blanche about his recusal, his supposed recusal. I asked him if he talked to Mr. Terrell. He acknowledged that he did. I asked him if he was advised by Mr. Terrell. Did Mr. Terrell tell you that ethics laws and policies required that you not be involved in cases involving your prior representation of the president? His answer was yes. So in those three matters, the hush money payment case, January 6th case, Mar-a-Lago case, you were to recuse yourself. His answer was, I'm recused, correct? Well, by the way, he said the cases are not ongoing, Senator. Yes. But to the extent there's any work around those cases, yes, I'm recused. So then I brought up, and you must have watched the hearing, so you said to CPAC a couple months ago, the other things that are happening, there was not a single man or woman at the Department of Justice who had anything to do with those prosecutions, meaning the prosecution of the president. Now, you had something to do with those prosecutions, right?
I was a spokesman for the office.
For the Office of the Special Counsel.
Correct.
That was leading both of those investigations into Mar-a-Lago, the classified documents and obstruction case, as well as the January 6th case.
Correct.
So by by what he described to CPAC, you were included among those not left standing as a result of those firings. So I asked him, so you're saying that it's not a conflict of interest for you to be involved in the firing of prosecutors who prosecuted your client, your former client. There's no conflict there. Is that your, and his answer was no, there is. They said there is a conflict of interest. I wasn't involved. That would be a conflict of interest. But he fired you, right?
He signed my termination notice, yes.
He signed your termination notice. So he signed the termination of someone who worked on the prosecution of his former client and arguably his current client, Donald Trump.
Correct.
He signed the termination notice. Then he looked a Senate committee in the eye and claimed he had nothing to do with those firings. Then he walked onto a CPAC stage and bragged that not a single person involved in prosecuting his former client was left standing. 3 versions. 1 man. 0 shame. This is not a scheduling error or a memory lapse. This is a skill. The same skill that lets certain officials swear loyalty to principle in one room and loyalty to power in the next. Pete Hegseth has turned it into an art form at the Pentagon. Todd Blanche is simply running the Justice Department edition. A career prosecutor who once worked beside him just confirmed the signature on the page. The paper does not lie. Blanche does. What comes next is even uglier. The same hand that signed those firings also blessed an IRS deal a Florida judge called a sham, and later gave a convicted sex trafficker 9 full hours while her victims got 60 minutes. If that pattern does not stop you cold, the rest of this hearing will. Drop a like if you want the receipts kept coming, and tell me in the comments which contradiction hit hardest, the signature, the CPAC speech, or the sudden amnesia in front of Congress. The next chapter only gets darker.
Thank you, Senator Booker, for holding this hearing. Thank you all for testifying. And Mr. Carbone, I couldn't agree more. It's a staggering conflict of interest, self-dealing. I wrote down the 3 words that Blanche used to describe that IRS sham of a settlement. I think he said regular, typical, and I can't remember the third, but they were anything but accurate descriptors of that unique agreement, which, as the judge in Florida pointed out, has relief for people who are not even parties to the litigation, to the degree there was any litigation, with remedies that have nothing to do with the alleged offense, and uses such broad terms as to be really totally in the eye of the beholder. And I think Senator Cornyn was right. It was also quite striking that Blanche attributed to himself the power to speak for people on both sides of that agreement by saying that it was dead. How could he speak for the other side of that agreement? Well, because he was on both sides of the deal.
Blanche called that agreement regular and typical. The judge saw something else entirely. Relief handed to people who were never parties to the case, remedies that had nothing to do with the alleged offense, and language so elastic it lived only in the eye of the beholder. Then Blanche claimed the power to declare the deal dead on behalf of both sides at once. How does one man speak for opposing parties? Because he had already stood on both sides of the table. This is not parallel misconduct. It is the same operating system. One signature removes prosecutors who once targeted his former client. Another signature reshapes tax exposure in ways that could quietly benefit that same client. Different rooms, identical conflict. Watch how cleanly the pattern mirrors the rest of this administration. Pete Hegseth can lecture the nation on integrity, while the chain of command rearranges itself around personal loyalty. Blanche simply applies the identical formula inside the Department of Justice. Principle is negotiable the moment it collides with the principle. The paper trail has now moved from firings to finances. What it reveals next is no longer a single lie. It is a method.
I mean, it seems to me that was a pretty direct lie he told to our committee. Now, maybe he would quarrel with describing him as a prosecutor, but he wasn't quibbling over that when he was speaking to CPAC. He said no one involved in those cases is still remaining at the department. And when I asked him about taking credit for that, he said, no, that was just a statement I made. But wouldn't it also be a conflict of interest if that supposed tax agreement impacted Trump's potential liability for what had been mischaracterized as business payments? The hush money payments, according to the statement of facts in that indictment, were designed to conceal their true nature and in so doing mislead tax authorities. Wouldn't the signing of that settlement also impact his client potentially in that kind of a case?
I defer to the lawyers on the panel. I am not a lawyer. So.
Yeah.
Senator Schiff, I expect that the lack of transparency around Donald Trump's finances would, if reversed, reveal a lot of conflicts of interest. And I think you're absolutely right that the firing of U.S. attorneys or spokesmen, individuals who were involved in any way in those cases, was, as you seem to be suggesting, largely motivated by not wanting those individuals to be involved. Moving forward, I think a Department of Justice headed by Todd Blanche would have conflicts of interest and problems with regard to lawyers' ethics shot through it at every level, which is why my concern is that if recusal were done right in his case, he would be recusing from the vast majority of what the Department of Justice is currently doing.
Blanche had already admitted under questioning that ethics advice required his recusal from anything touching his former client. He had already claimed at CPAC that not a single person involved in those prosecutions remained. Yet the moment the termination notice was placed in front of him, the story shifted again. Suddenly the firings were someone else's work. Suddenly the credit he took on stage was just a statement. There is no interpretive daylight left. Either the signature is real or the testimony is false. Both cannot stand. The same conflict now reaches further. If that tax settlement altered the characterization of payments once labeled hush money, it potentially touched the very exposure Blanche was supposed to avoid. A recused official does not get to reshape the battlefield and then pretend the map never changed. This is the point where the administration's favorite defense collapses. Pete Hegseth can still hide behind, "I wasn't briefed." Blanche no longer can. The record has closed the exits. What remains is no longer a dispute over facts. It is a question of how many more doors the same method has already walked through.
I completely agree. Mr. Carr, if I could just return to you for a moment. He signed your termination. Are you aware of whether he signed any terminations involving any of the other members of Jack Smith's team?
I don't know. I did reach out to a few of them. Some of them were fired before he became a deputy attorney general. Others were fired after. So I don't know. I will say...
I would be very interested if any of your colleagues share with you. I think we would all be interested to know whether You're not the only one that he fired on the on the Smith team, or in any of the investigations that he is supposedly recused from. Mr. Carbone, I asked Mr. Blanche a question at the end of the hearing. It was kind of interesting because most of the fact-based questions I asked him, he dodged. The one more or less rhetorical question he really seemed determined to answer, which is, what happened to you? What happened to the Todd Blanche of the Southern District of New York, who was a respected prosecutor? You knew him, you worked with him. I understand from others in your old office that he was held in high regard. What do you think happened to him?
Well, Senator, you were in the room when I gave my opening remarks, but as I said, I worked closely with him. I personally liked him, I respected him, and I valued our relationship. He was a very affable prosecutor. He was fair-minded. He had a lot of good qualities. I don't know what happened to him. I do know what I see, and I can only judge his conduct. I have not had any extensive contact with him in the past year.
Carbonell did not arrive to settle scores. He spoke as someone who once shared an office and real respect with Todd Blanche. He liked him. He called that earlier version fair-minded and affable. Then came the quiet verdict. That man is gone. Schiff refused to romanticize the change. People rarely transform overnight. They simply stop hiding what was already present. The moment ambition and principle are forced into the same room and only one survives. The choice reveals the hierarchy that always existed. The pattern is no longer rare. Officials enter with reputations for seriousness and leave with little more than the skill of surviving the next loyalty test. Pete Hegseth offers the military version, public lectures on character followed by private rearrangements of standards. Blanche offers the legal one. What Carbonell described is not a mystery. It is a completed transaction. Principle was priced. Ambition paid. The earlier man was the cost. The hearing now turns from individual character to the institutional ranking that character produces.
2 years. It's been very fleeting, and I don't know what happened, but he certainly is not the person that I once worked with.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I mentioned this at the hearing. I don't think people change that much. I suspect it's more that we don't really know who they are until they show themselves, until they are forced to make a difficult decision between their ambition and their principles. And we've seen this. He's not alone in this. We've seen this from so many people who work in this building or the administration, who come to Congress or come to the administration as one person and seemingly transmogrify to something completely different. And I suspect that character flaw was there all along. They just never were forced to make the choices that reveal who they really are. The last question, Ms. Stein, and thank you so much for being here. I was struck by the completely anomalous behavior of Mr. Blanche going to interview one of the co-conspirators, the primary co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein, Maxwell. The fact that he seemed to take no one who really knew the facts of the case, which no self-respecting prosecutor would do, that he didn't challenge any of her many misrepresentations, and that magically she ended up in this prison camp afterwards, unsuited for a sex predator like her. How did victims feel watching that spectacle, that charade? What was that like?
Very difficult for us, as it would be very difficult for any victim of crime. Ghislaine Maxwell has shown herself to perjure herself in civil litigation, and it really wasn't lost on us that Mr. Blanche spent 9 hours, 2 days interviewing her, but for months and months and months, we couldn't get in front of the Department of Justice. And when we did, we had about an hour with Mr. Blanche, which was nothing in comparison. Maxwell's move to a low-security facility is unprecedented for anyone with a conviction that she holds. I mean, it's just unheard of. We are further concerned because this administration has not ruled out a pardon. This woman was convicted of sex trafficking.
9 hours across 2 full days for Ghislaine Maxwell. 60 minutes for the women she helped traffic after they spent months simply trying to be heard. That is not a calendar accident. It is a ranking. The same office that cleared its ranks of prosecutors who once pursued Trump's co-conspirators now clears its schedule for the co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein. The same leadership that treated a Florida judge's warning about a conflicted tax settlement as background noise treats a convicted sex trafficker to a prison transfer almost unheard of for her crime. And the same administration that still refuses to rule out a pardon for her. Carbonell's quiet observation about the man he once respected now sits inside a larger frame. When principle is priced and ambition pays, the institution itself begins to rank its priorities the same way. Victims wait. The well-connected receive the long interview, the softer facility, and the open door to clemency talk. This is the finished product of the method tracked across the hearing, a signature that removed inconvenient prosecutors, a settlement stretched beyond any normal legal boundary, a public claim of non-involvement collapsed by the paper trail, a former colleague who could no longer recognize the man. All of it leads here, a Department of Justice that has stopped pretending the scales are even. The pattern is not confined to one building. Pete Hegseth can still deliver speeches about honor while the standards under him quietly rearrange around loyalty. Blanche has simply applied the identical operating system to justice itself. Different uniforms, same hierarchy. Schiff did not need to shout. He only needed to place the termination notice on the table, then let the rest of the record speak. The 9-hour interview and the 60-minute afterthought did the rest. What the hearing ultimately exposed is not a single lie or a single conflict. It is a completed reordering of who matters and who can wait. If this ranking disturbs you, make sure the receipts keep traveling. Like the video so the algorithm cannot bury it, and tell me in the comments which part of the disparity you find most indefensible, the 9 hours, the prison move, or the refusal to close the door on a pardon. The full hearing is worse than any single clip. Stay with it.